Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I feel honored to be able to talk to you today. The topic is the slow classroom. More specifically, the future of education. I think for most of us, technology is to learning what fast food is to cuisine. Massive, supersized quantities of information of dubious origin comes at us from everywhere, from the phones inside of our pockets, from the computers on our desks, from the smart boards in our classrooms. And it distracts us, doesn't it? It makes it hard to concentrate. Even for the length of a TED Talk, it's hard to concentrate because we have in our brains somewhere this idea that there's some important information going to come at us through our pockets, in our cell phones, something that we need, something that's urgent. We're going on break in a few minutes, and how many of us do you think will immediately pull out of our pockets our cell phones and check? Is there some pressing matter that demands our attention? Maybe. But probably more we're paranoid that there's some information we're missing. And I think that flood of information causes information overload. It's not a new term. It disrupts deep, genuine, creative thought. It disrupts our ability to learn. This is one of my two pictures I'm going to show you. It's the Spanish Steps in Rome. It's a famous tourist attraction. It connects two of the central plazas, according to Wikipedia, the source of all information. It is the widest staircase in Europe. I don't know if that's true. It doesn't seem that wide to me. Maybe some staircase expert can elucidate that for us. But in 1986, the McDonald's Corporation set another record in that plaza. They opened the widest, or not the widest staircase, the largest McDonald's restaurant that had ever been built to date, with seating for 450 people right there on the plaza. I was reading this article in the United Press International talking about what it was like in 1986 at that McDonald's, and it said, every table is jam-packed. There's no way to get a table there. It's full of Italians enjoying fast food for the first time. The only free tables are right near the entrance of the restaurant, where there's the paramilitary police with machine guns to guard against terrorist attacks. Because outside the restaurant, there were protesters organized by an activist named Carlo Petrini. And I'm not sure that the machine guns were necessary. The protesters were armed with penne pasta, not with Molotov cocktails. They were having sort of the culinary version of a sit-in. They'd stand outside and eat pasta in protest. You see, in Italy, they have a slow food culture, and they always have. Food is prepared carefully, thoughtfully, with a lot of attention given to the ingredients. It's consumed carefully. It's consumed slowly. It's enjoyed and savored with your friends, probably over a bottle of wine. And fast food is an affront to that. Fast food is cheap, low-quality ingredients. Scarf it down, move on. And that's why it caused this cultural war in Italy. Carlo's protesters eventually became known as the slow food movement. I'm sure you've heard of it. It spawned other slow movements. The slow film movement is one of the more famous ones. For a lot of us, technology is to learning what fast food is to cuisine. Cheap, ill-considered, half-digested, and it becomes the basis for a shallow intellectual life. Too much information. This is not the first time that that technology rather, has been blamed for disrupting our mental lives. The 1800s, the 1850s, great time to be a shrink. People began being diagnosed with, they called it nervous anxiety, what we'd say is a stress disorder nowadays. Sensory overload. People were overwhelmed with these new technologies that were coming out. Writers were writing about how civilization was being destroyed, changed in a way that could never go back. You can scroll to the second picture. This was the culprit. People were pointing their fingers at the passenger train. The scheduled passenger train started in the 1820s and grew. Because, think about it, for millennia, people moved at a walking pace. They walked everywhere, or they rode on a walking animal, or they rode in a cart behind a walking animal. Do you take walks? Of course you do. How does it make you feel when you take a walk? Well, relaxed, contemplative, reflective. It's a way to get rid of stress. Imagine if that's all you ever did, was walk. How would you feel? How would your life be? And then we would pack people onto these passenger trains like wheels, and they would look out the window at the blurring landscape. I wrote down on the front of my program here this quote by Victor Hugo that I read. It's phenomenal. He was looking out of a train window sometime in the 1800s. He said, "The flowers by the side of the road are no longer flowers, but flecks, or rather streaks of red or white. There are no longer any points. Everything becomes a streak." The Lancet, which was a British medical journal at that time, wrote about how the amount of visual stimulus was causing this nervous anxiety in people, overwhelming them with too much information for them to process. With the advent of the passenger train, we lost time for reflection, and we turned up the noise on our sensory overload. I think you can see where I'm going with this. The analogy is fairly straightforward. The technology in our pockets and on our desks and in our smart boards and our classrooms is not the problem. It's the way we interact with it. That's the problem. I used to have a professor who would say, you don't learn by reading the book. You don't learn by coming to lecture. You don't learn by working the homework problems. You learn by thinking. You learn by thinking. Do you know the difference between information and knowledge? Probably. Information is data, it's facts. Knowledge is part of you. Knowledge affects the way you think, feel, act. You build information into knowledge by thinking. That's what the professor was saying. This is not a new idea. Learning theorists call it constructivism. It is the philosophical basis for constructionist learning practices. The idea that you take information, you think, and you build that into knowledge inside your mind. What we need is a slow tech movement. Some people call it slow web. Some people call it slow classroom. We need a new approach to how we deal with our technology and our information, the courage to shut it off, to stop and think, allow time for reflection, because the modern student can never build knowledge out of information without time for thought. And that's why we have to slow down. The future of technology is slow. That's all I have to say. Thanks for your attention.